Okay, I think it's a bit too loud. Alright, I think we can start. So today's topic is to have a quick look at the windows that Visual Studio has. Also about keybinds to speed up your productivity when coding in Visual Studio. So it's a variety of things that I'll try to cover. Windows which we use for building, inspecting our code, which we use to inspect state of our objects, and which we use to test, get stuff together, and so on and so forth. So let's get started. So the first part of this lesson will be about static windows in Visual Studio. Windows which don't require runtime, which work without the need of running your program. And there are quite a few of those. Well, of course, most of them are static windows. You don't have to run your code to be able to open one. And of course, the first one is Solution Explorer. But first, let's cover the main windows, in my opinion. You write code in code window, you'll always have that one open. One exception when you're configuring your project, then you won't have it open, but mostly it will be there. Solution Explorer is the second most important window, I think. Then NuGet Package Manager, where you get stuff that you need. Error list, where you see warnings, error messages, and info messages. An output window, where you see how your program is being executed and how your build went. So let's start from the Solution Explorer. Here you can see Solution Explorer. And of course it shows simply projects in your solution. Within this window, with solution itself, you can quickly configure different configurations for your project, how it runs, on which platform. So it's good. You can do all you want. Instead of clicking each project separately, you can use this as a dashboard for all. Yeah, otherwise, well, another thing why it's useful is that you can add projects to it. Sometimes when you move projects, you might mess it up. So you might need to add projects or change paths manually. Either re-add them or add paths or change paths manually through the solution window file. So here you see the path, and you will have to change that one when you want to fix errors about paths to your solution. Okay, let's continue. Second very important window is NuGet Package Manager. And we don't reinvent the wheel, we use what we can. With developers, we're lazy, and there's a place where you can find lots of nice code, and that's NuGet Package Manager. It's like a Google search for code that we can reuse for free in our projects. And you can access it through Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. Browse and then type whatever you want and see what happens. I wanted to parse JSON and see I have Newton's log JSON. I just get it to my solution and it works. Useful, really useful. Alternative to it is using console, as you can see here. then a little window will pop up at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to do something like npm install NuGet package and so on. Both ways work. The second way, which is console, is usually more for less accessible, older, specific version NuGet packages, though you can get specific versions from NuGet Package Manager too, but sometimes not all of them are publicly accessible. But through console, you should have more access than through the NuGet Package Manager. Yet it's more complicated to use. So next window is output window. It's simply info about running application, about building it, and the level of detail that you see in the output window can be changed in the settings. It's called verbosity. So if you go to Tools, Options, Projects and Solutions, Build and Run, and I'll go there. Tools, Options, Projects and Solutions, Build and Run, you see verbosity section, and if I put it to quiet, it will be very minimalistic. I will basically see that if it succeeded, start it, and that's it. But if I put diagnostic, it will show every single thing that Visual Studio does for me. So when something goes wrong, I recommend turning it on to diagnostic or at least detailed, so then you have that much needed detail to determine your problem. Errors window is probably fourth most important window, or third most important window. Anyways, it shows three things: errors, warnings, and info messages. If I go to my solution, and if I check error list right now, I have no errors. If I have a single error right here, you see I have an error. And errors basically mean that my project, my solution, will not be able to compile. So I have to fix those errors in order to compile my solution. Warnings, which is actually a big mistake that people do. Warnings are something that people ignore. If they see a warning, they say, well, don't mind that. It's just something that you didn't do the best way, that it's a bit dirty, but it certainly isn't impacting your program in any way. It will still run, but that's not true. Warnings sometimes mean that something wasn't loaded, and you will see problems during runtime, problems when you build. Not necessarily immediately, your program will compile, but it will not build. And that's why warnings should not be ignored, because they're a smell, there's something that should be fixed. And they are not as severe as errors, but they're still a mistake that a programmer did. And lastly, you have messages. Messages are recommendations. Recommendations by Visual Studio. You see this light bulb? It recommends me to do certain things. Owner is not set, or it is set, but it's not set. So that's the first thing that it suggests me to do, to set it. Or here I'm adding multiple people to a list, so it suggests me to add them from an object initializer instead of calling add multiple times. So those are info messages, those are suggestions, but they are not as severe as warnings and certainly not as severe as errors. So next would be call hierarchy. This one is much less used. If I go to Visual Studio and right click on caster, and I click call hierarchy, it will show where my object was called. It says that nothing called caster. There were no creations of caster. No calls to cast. In my solution, in current project, there should have been actually calls to cast. No usages. Okay, there weren't. Makes sense, it aligns. If I go to here, right, it's student, so makes sense. I'm doing different simulation. Okay, so if I go here and teach, this is a better example. View call hierarchy. To teach. To teach, there was nothing but begin lesson. There were. So ring a bell, calls to ring a bell, and you can see here the call hierarchy piling up. Like when I begin lesson is called from ring a bell is called from main. And in the end, when you reach this, that's where it stops. Main was not called from anywhere, it's an entry point, so that makes sense. All right, and that's called hierarchy. When you want to, let's say, explore a project given to you by someone else, when you want to check out what happened, what is going on, when you want to get a better understanding of what a program does, of how an algorithm works, then call hierarchy helps a lot, as it gives you a nice overview of the flow of program, of at least that function, where it travels through what. Test Explorer. More people should be writing tests, more than they are right now. And Test Explorer is a window through which you can run tests. In my case, if I say I want to run all tests, or if I want to see a test window, you see it there. I don't have many tests here, as it's just a tutorial, but I have 3 tests. So if test is lit green, it passed. If it's red, it failed. And here you can see test project, actually very much like a solution. You see a solution, a project, except for test only project, and then class, and then, test project, class, and then methods. So sometimes Test Explorer doesn't appear. Sometimes Visual Studio, like in this case, doesn't let you run a test just through a right click. So you sometimes have to go and manually run them through this menu. So that's Test Runner. Right, let's continue. Test Explorer, sorry, that's Test Explorer and Test Runner. I think the most interesting window of this lesson, which I also was not too aware of, is CSharp Interactive. It's a window which lets you write code in C# without the need of building a program, without the need of compiling it. Not at least directly, it's all done automatically as you type there. And the good of it is that you can test and write your code without the need of, without changing your code. All your code written is temporary. Of course, you can move it later on, but the point of it is that you write code as you go, it's temporary, but you get immediate evaluation, immediate response in the window. So let's try something. If I go to View, Other Windows, and CSharp Interactive, I can do something like, let's say I say var lesson is lesson 1, and that's good that it failed. So var lesson is lesson 1, and console write line hello divs on. So if I do this, you can see immediate evaluation of my expression, that it printed immediately to my to the same window. Let's say you have what do I have? Well, I don't really have a database right now, but or any much place where I could what I could test in a useful manner, but when something is in a method deep inside, Python T. Okay. But essentially, I can write all sorts of code. Right now, you see that it failed. It failed because it's in a different project, but I can load immediate window with my project setup with all the references it has. Interactive window, sorry. So, where is it? Interactive. Initialize interactive with project. I guess test project is not an option to initialize with, but with other projects I can. So if I click this, it does a reset, but it loads my assemblies. As you see, there's a using right away, and that means that I can access classes from that assembly. Like this. And I should get an exception now. Yep. Okay. So you might ask, why do we need this thing? Well, alternative would be using LinQpad, but the thing with LinQpad is that it's a separate program. It's a different thing, and it works externally. And in order for us to load all the assemblies that we need to do quite a bit of setting up, and that's why in this window, it's not a horrible idea to use it for quick testing, for quick tinkering and seeing what happens with the code. So it's not too bad. All right, let's move on. So interactive window concludes the static windows that we have, windows that we don't really need to run our program to see what happens. Now, for debugging windows, there are 4 main windows that I consider Very important. It's watch window, immediate window, call stack, and exception settings. Immediate window is very much like interactive C# window, except that it picks up a current state of your code, of your objects. Let me demonstrate. If I hit run, it opens a console, and here you can see I am in a method. I put a breakpoint and it stopped. If I go to debug, Windows, and immediate, I can do things with it. For example, I can say student. First, let me go inside this, and if I hit student and press enter, it prints, it evaluates student. It evaluates student as an object. In other words, it calls the string on student. And since I overrid the toString method, it prints information about the student. So here it is, information about student. That's quite handy. What can I do with it? I can do pretty much similar things like interactive window, except that I only can execute instructions one line at a time. So let's say I'm curious about the size of students list. It's IEnumerable. So it's 2. Of course, I could just hover it and I would see that, but that's not the point. The point is that I can do all sorts of manipulations and it just evaluates everything during runtime with the state that I have. It even reruns my functions. So it's really useful. Now another window is exception settings. If something goes wrong, there is an option in Visual Studio, which is usually by default on, to break on exception. If something goes wrong, you want your program to stop and you might want to inspect what happened. You don't want to put a breakpoint initially, but you want to stop and see what went wrong. So if I go to immediate window and break something, for example, do a stupid thing like modifying a collection I'm iterating through, clear. Doesn't have clear. Okay. Students to list. No, it won't work. Or will it? Okay. Var. Okay, students will be a new list. And it should give me an exception. Cannot modify it like this. Okay, let's throw an exception manually. Let's do something stupid. Throw new exception test. Run. So you see I did not put a breakpoint here, but it stopped at the exception which was thrown here. And you see this tick that you can turn it off if you don't want to break here. If you think it's obvious enough and you don't need extra info, or you don't want to stop here every time it fails. Exception settings are useful. You can also set conditions when it breaks and when it stops, but that's not for this lesson. Call stack. Very simple as well. If I go to my program and again, debug, Windows, call stack, you can see through which parts of the program, through which lines and which file my program went in order to get to this point, to get to this line. And here you can see the line I'm currently at. It even shows exact line file. So here you can see I'm in this method, and those are the lines of code that it had to pass in order to get here. Quite useful. Right, and watch. Last but not least is watch. Here I already have a watch. Let's say I don't have watch. And if I want to have watch, I will go here and say watch. Watch is